Hello everyone, my name is Kelli Paddon and I'm BC's Parliamentary Secretary for Gender Equity. My pronouns are she and her, and I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining from the traditional territory of the Lekwungen peoples, the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. Today is a really important day in British Columbia, and I'm proud to be part of such an amazing team of people. And to those who are fighting for justice, for safety, and working hard to make life better for others. Today is also a really tough day because we have stories to share, and some that are very painful. And we know there are others who are hurting for very similar reasons, which is why we are here. I'd like to ask Attorney General Niki Sharma to join us to say more.
Thank you, Parliamentary Secretary Paddon. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. As Kelly said, my name is Niki Sharma. I'm the Attorney General of BC, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm happy to be here on the traditional territory of Lekwungen-speaking people, the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nation. Today is an important day. The Intimate Images Protection Act sends a clear message. Circulating or threatening to distribute intimate images is sexualized violence, and it can have devastating impacts. For those who've experienced this violation, you do not need to suffer in silence. Putting your trust in someone is not a crime, and your privacy must be protected. This is true even if, particularly if, you are a minor. You do not need to feel embarrassed or ashamed, and we are creating better legal options so you can get the justice that you deserve on your own terms. The Intimate Images Protection Act will provide new ways to stop or prevent distribution and get your images taken offline. It will give people a more effective way to seek compensation for the harm they have suffered, and it will fast-track the legal process to determine intimate images are unlawful and order people to stop distributing them or threatening to distribute them. This covers intimate images, near-nude images, videos, live streams, and digitally altered images. It will also include special provisions set out by regulation that give minors access to the legal tools they need to take action to protect their own images. It will require perpetrators to delete or destroy images or order social media platforms to remove the intimate images and de-index them from their search engines. To support the legislation, the Civil Resolution Tribunal will expand its online portal so people can independently diagnose their legal issues, get information on their rights, access self-help tools, and connect to supports. I'd like to take a moment to speak to those people who commit this type of abuse. There is no excuse for your actions. This is not funny. This is not a game. You are violating a person's privacy and dignity. You are committing sexualized violence, which has cost real people's lives. No one cares about the reasons you think you've committed these actions. We're putting would-be perpetrators on notice. This disturbing behavior is against the law, and there are serious consequences. If it isn't your image, you don't get to decide who sees it. I also want to speak directly to those who have suffered this kind of abuse. You've done nothing wrong. Let me repeat that. You've done nothing wrong. No matter who you are, what your age is, you have the right to privacy. You have the right to control your own images, and no one has the right to hurt you, and it's never your fault. Please, if you are suffering, reach out to a loved one, a trusted person, or a helpline. You are loved and you have support. Everyone deserves to feel safe in their communities and online. That's why we're working across government to expand and improve services for people who are survivors of sexualized violence. Addressing the non-consensual sharing of intimate images is a critical part of how we are working to better protect people in BC. It's horrible that some people take advantage of those who have shared their images. This happens more often than we know, and behind each headline we see in the media, there are real people whose lives are being seriously harmed or lost to this form of sexualized violence. No one knows better than Carol Todd about this. Carol's daughter Amanda lost her life to suicide 10 years ago because of prolonged and relentless bullying she was subjected to online when she was 15 years old. I'm so grateful that Carol has joined us here today. Carol, I know that each time that you share this story, you have to relive the trauma and the pain of suffering from losing Amanda, and I hope it provides you some comfort to be here today, to know that your story is helping so many people, and that we stand here with you. Keeping a light on Amanda's story is part of how we stop this from happening to other children, and I'm happy to turn the microphone over to you now.
Oh, this has been a very emotional day that I didn't expect all the emotions to come rising up in me, but I will get through my words to you as best I can. I am honored to have been invited here for this announcement of the Intimate Image Protection Act that has taken place today in the province of British Columbia. My daughter, Amanda Todd, was a victim of exploitation and sextortion where her intimate image was shared over the internet when she was 13 years old. This happened in 2010, and through the repugnant behaviors of Amanda's offender and the cyberbullying that followed from Amanda's peers, Amanda became traumatized and her mental health quickly deteriorated. She was an innocent person that was victimized. She was intimidated, exploited, cyber abused, and sextorted. Sadly, we have all come to know the ending of her story. I quoted during the trial of Amanda's offender last year that I had wanted legal changes that were needed to better protect children and youth. And I said that if our federal government couldn't change it in the criminal code, that maybe we could add technology as a weapon somewhere in legislation. And never in my deepest thoughts did I think that we could do it in British Columbia. But today has shown that we have. We are now in 2023, 13 years after Amanda's image was initially shared across the internet. We have continued to see, read, and hear about the increase in numbers of images and videos that get shared without permission. You may also hear this referenced as technology-facilitated gender-based violence, as well as non-consensual disclosure of intimate images. The criminal act of sharing and distributing without consent is occurring pervasively across the internet. The internet has no global boundaries, and this is happening too often and too frequently. Consent equals permission, and the Criminal Code of Canada defines consent as the voluntary agreement to engage in the sexual activity in question. Consent equals permission. Unlawful distribution without consent is criminal. What is exploitation? Exploitation is the act of selfishly taking advantage of someone or a group of people in order to profit from them or otherwise benefit oneself. That leads us to sextortion. Sextortion is blackmail. It's when someone online threatens to send a sexual image or video of you or another person if you don't pay them or provide more sexual content. That's what happened to Amanda. That's what's happening to many youth out there, not only in BC, not only in Canada, but across the world. The prevalence of exploitation and sextortion has steadily increased over the years, and with the ease of access to electronic devices, bad actors are lurking and preying and hunting for vulnerable victims, our kids. There is a need for increased awareness and education for children, youth, their parents, caregivers, law enforcement, community leaders, educators, and the list goes on. The brunt of these criminal actions has fallen upon innocent victims, many of them being minor children and youth, and has left them with feelings of being abused, manipulated, mistreated, and not heard. The sexual exploitation of children and youth in our society has steadily risen without seemingly no end in sight. Remember when I mentioned earlier that the use of technology in partnership with the internet has made living a bit more complex? Well, it's a lot more complex now in 2023. Exploitation with the sharing of non-consensual images and videos also affects our younger and older adults. This act will protect all of us. Something you might have not known, that in 2021, the FBI, and remember the internet is global, there are no boundaries. The FBI received 18,000 reports of sextortion in 2021. In Canada, through cybertips.ca, there are 70 sextortion reports a week. Cybertips receives and creates alerts out there for us to read. And part of education and awareness, we need to take effect and we need to go to these sites to learn more so that we can talk to our children and kids. Because oftentimes those victims, those children, those youth, those young adults, those adults that are targeted are often left with a feeling of lack of recourse, a lack of support, ongoing mental anguish, trauma, fear, and shame that is never ending. And we also know that these attacks can have devastating, life-altering consequences on the health and well-being of those targeted, plus their families. And if left unassisted, devastating consequences may occur, such as what happened to my daughter Amanda. BC has now come in line with many of the other provinces with acts such as the Intimate Image Protection Act. This will make our citizens feel safer in knowing that they are supported and will have the protections in place for them to remove intimate images and videos from the internet so that they can feel safe from a trial, a criminal court trial, and from being further victimized and further traumatized. With the Intimate Image Protection Act in British Columbia, we will be able to see concrete and positive actions for all citizens in our province. Every person will have the ability to report the removal of intimate images and videos that have been put on the internet of them. This will also include requests of images and videos to be taken down of a deceased person. Every person will have access to the supports they need. Publication bans will be put in place for reasons of anonymity for victims, and exceptions will be looked at for lifting of the ban on a per-application basis. Social media platforms will have the responsibility of taking them down. The targeted victim will have someone working with them to make this happen, which will take away much of the stress and pressures of what to do next. There will be supports available and dedicated plans of action. The Intimate Images Protection Act is victim-centered and will make it easier and more accessible for those wanting to come forward to report without waiting and worrying about what to do next. Preying on vulnerability in this way is not only an invasion, but a criminal act. Making those who are responsible for the sharing and distribution understand that there are consequences of their negative actions is a must, and they must be deterred from doing so ever again. In conclusion, people, without consideration of gender, race, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, and ability, have a right to being safe in the online spaces they choose to work, play, and communicate in. The online world has become yet another space which has become an important part of our daily lives. We should not be afraid of being able to live our lives in either the online or offline worlds. And while it is wonderful to have bills, acts, legislative laws, we also have to remember what the primary focus on prevention We also need to remember that the primary focus on prevention is necessary. We have to continue the education awareness that is necessary to safeguard our children, youth, and ourselves in the technology in our world. Thank you to the Province of British Columbia for making the Intimate Image Protection Act happen. I would also like to thank everyone for continuing to let Amanda's voice shine through. If she were alive to see and hear us, she would certainly be grinning down upon us and cheering loudly as change is made. This is the dream of helping kids that she always wanted. Thank you with much love, respect, and caring.
Thank you so much, Carol. As a mother, my heart goes out to you and your entire family for what you've been through. Your brave and tireless advocacy to get justice for your daughter. One of the reasons this legislation is so meaningful to me personally is because I have a daughter who's 15 with us. And I need everyone to know that no matter how old a person is, they should have ready access to the tools needed to stop the distribution of private images if this is happening. I am so grateful to you for making BC a different place for my daughter. So thank you. I would like to introduce Nick Sandor from the Men's Therapy Center now. Nick?
Thank you, everyone. And I think this is a really big day for justice. My name is Nick Sandor. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the Executive Director of the Men's Therapy Center. We support masculine identified and gender nonconforming survivors of trauma in our community. And we're just really enthusiastic about the justice that the Intimate Image Protections Act brings. First of all, it's an example of the government communicating that we believe survivors. This encourages victims to come forward, ending generations of silence, fear, and shame. Second, we know that trauma survivors do have high rates of suicide, substance use-related deaths, and the validation that justice can provide will not only lead to better mental health outcomes, it will in fact save lives in the future. This legislation is also accountability in action. And accountability is a pillar of a consent-based culture. It's critical for dismantling cycles of abuse, gender-based violence, and intergenerational trauma. And as someone that's like a new father to a little girl, to someone that's a man in this community, we need to be having these conversations. I think since Me Too, there's been a call to men to do better and to do different. And we all kind of struggle under the systems and the old ways of doing things. But just speaking to other men in the community, it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to do better because we're all going to be better for it. People are going to be safer. People are going to be whole. And we're just going to have better communities that are meaningful, authentic. And just seeing this legislation come through today and thinking about what that means with all the survivors I've worked with over the years, it's life-changing. It opens a lot of possibilities for people to be heard, be taken seriously, and change really what we're doing to make serious efforts to dismantle gender-based violence in our communities. So thank you, everyone, for everything today.
Thank you so much for sharing. Sharing a nude, near nude, or intimate photo of another person without consent is against the law. It is malicious and exploitative, and it is a horrible form of sexualized violence. Part of the work me and my team have underway is to introduce an action plan to help end gender-based violence. Today's announcement is an important part of this work. As a government, we need to better protect our young people and other vulnerable people and make it as quick and easy as possible to help, to get justice, and to know that they are not alone and that we are here to help. And we need to work together because no one person, one family, or government can do this work alone. I am so grateful to everyone here today and for being part of a future where my daughter and her friends and all those in our communities know their rights to safety are protected. Thank you.
Thank you. As a reminder to everyone on the line, please press star 1 to enter the queue. You are limited to one question and a follow-up. We will start from the room. The first question comes from Mira Baines, CBC.
This question is for the Attorney General. In terms of fast-tracking this bill, when can this legislation go into effect and how will it be fast-tracked?
Question's really an important one. So there's a few elements to this bill, or this piece of legislation, are very important. So the first one is before the House. We're hoping that it'll get passed quickly. It'll be introduced by regulation afterwards, and then the Supreme Court will have jurisdiction until the Civil Resolution Tribunal takes effect with the online. But there's an important part of it where it's a retrospective application. So perpetrators need to know right now, as of first reading, that there are new legal consequences for actions of spreading non-consensual disclosure of intimate images as of today. So the damage awards and things will start as of today.
Follow-up, Mira?
Yes, and I'm just wondering, how fast can someone actually get through the process and see that request? Like, what's the goal in terms of, you know, having the request made to get the images down and having them taken down? And what are the steps? Like, who do they contact? What do they do?
Yeah, really great questions. So we're going to have a whole bunch of information sessions on the whole process for frontline workers once the online portal's launched. But really, the goal with going with the Civil Resolution Tribunal is it's an online forum, an application, and you can have very quick responses for orders. So you can have a turnaround very quickly where a decision maker comes on, listens to your evidence, determines that it's non-consensual disclosure of intimate images, and issues an order to get that pulled down. So it's a very quick turnaround in our justice system, and that was the thing that's different about this legislation than other provinces. Is we decided that in order to have more easily accessible court process or justice process, especially for minors, that it would go with the Civil Resolution Tribunal, an online process that could be quicker.
Rob Shaw, Check News.
How confident are you that an order from the Civil Resolution Tribunal would compel Google or Facebook or TikTok or whoever to de-index a search result and act quickly when that order is made?
Yeah, so this gives us really new tools to do that. So once the legislation is in place, you'll have orders and injunctions that are possible through our justice process. So it really does target social media platforms to compel them to take down those images quickly. It's a way of our province stepping up against those big multinationals to say that we want to protect our citizens, and we'll use all the tools that we can in our justice system to do so.
And
Follow-up, Rob?
So is there a consequence to Instagram or someone not responding in a certain time frame, or what compels them to do it? And then also there was a mention of assistance for people in the process to confront those companies with this order, or is there a built-in mechanism to help them find how to contact Google to de-index the search engine?
Yeah, so it's very victim focused. It's actually, it removes the onus from the victim and puts it on the perpetrator and or the court system to enforce. So the intention wouldn't be for the victim to have to go out and do all these things. Once they receive that order that has been decided that this is non-consensual disclosure or a threat, that's an important part of it that's different in our province. It could be a threat to that disclosure. Their order, once they have that order, there's all these mechanisms that the justice system will take on, or the Civil Resolution Tribunal will take on to enforce that order.
Wolf Debner, BC Press, Black Press.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. How much money do you plan to spend on this new enforcement mechanism? What sort of financial commitment do you plan to put forward over, say, the next 5 years?
Yeah, I'm happy to provide you with those details after this. I don't have them right now, but really we're setting up a specialized division in the Civil Resolutions Tribunal that would be just for these types of orders that would be focused on that. I'm happy to get you the information of the cost as it unfolds. There's some parts of this legislation that'll be set up by regulation afterwards, so we'll be shortly after it's passed, if it's passed here, working on those regulations that will set out things like the fines and the process for that.
Will follow up, please.
Thank you. This may be a technical question, but how do you plan to deal with the jurisdictional issues? Because a lot of these sites that have these type of images exist outside of BC, outside of Canada. They often hide behind VPNs. How do you plan to go after these servers who may not be readily available or who may not be readily accessible by the local justice system?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a challenge that jurisdictions across the world are facing when it comes to enforcement. And as we've seen, we can set up laws in here, and we will set up enforcement laws to the maximum of our ability in the province to enforce jurisdictions all over the world. The intention is for this to be as broad-reaching as possible in terms of what our powers can do right here in BC to protect the victims. So it's any kind of distribution of these images. And we'll certainly do everything we can in the court process to enforce them.
Alec Lesenby, BC Today.
Hi, Minister. I was just wondering, in terms of the penalties that people who do share explicit images can be likely to pay, if you know who they are, if you know that they're in BC and don't have any other jurisdictional issues to worry about, what can they be expected to pay? Like, what is the scale of the damages that can be claimed? What is the amount that somebody who shares these images can expect to pay?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So there's two answers to that. The first will be introduced by regulation soon. So we'll have the direct administrative penalties that are part of this legislation introduced by legislation in the coming time. But there's also the important process that somebody can go to the Supreme Court for damages. So all of the personal injury law would apply to that. So they could make a claim for damages in the levels of court to seek compensation for the harms of that distribution had on them. So the damages or the amount that they would be able to would be determined by court, but in line with the personal injury laws.
Follow up, Alec.
For sure. And my second question is about children and youth, obviously helping them through this civil resolutions process, helping them, with getting these images taken down. It mentions in the legislation that there will be somebody there to help them with this process. Do you mind explaining a little bit about, who that will be and how that process will work?
Yeah, that's a really important question. So we have a whole bunch of service agencies across this province that are focused on youth. And our intention when we roll this out is to really engage, and I had some great ideas from Carol beforehand, with all of the front line of this. So whether it's schools, whether it's those child services and nonprofits that are out there that are interacting with children. We expanded this legislation to make it so a child doesn't have to disclose to their parents in order to come forward, because sometimes that's a barrier, right, that keeps them quiet and these images being distributed. So it could be a caregiver or a teacher or somebody else that's in contact with this young person. And all of the tools and the things that we're learning about online applications are going to apply. So it's going to be a very easy portal that actually explains what your legal rights are and helps you fill out the applications, because we wanted to make sure that young people are able to access this, because time is of the essence for them, and there's also barriers to coming forward for some of the feelings that they may have in doing so.
Moving on to the phone, Richard Zussman, Global News.
This is for the Attorney General. Minister, I know Carol Todd read out some numbers, but do we have anything specific around BC and how often these sort of instances of sharing these images happen? And more specifically, what percentage of those cases are actually brought forward publicly?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Unfortunately, we know that it's probably way more prevalent than we think it is, because there's, like I mentioned earlier, there's lots of shame and sometimes lack of understanding what options are or things associated with young people from coming forward. So it's hard to know. I think you've probably seen recent reports about cases of sextortion on the rise, and Carol mentioned some of the stats. Yeah, I'm sure. Do you want to come answer? Please jump in.
Right now in the media globally, we're hearing about sextortion and sextortion with boys, minor child youth boys. with the RCMP, I just listened to a learning session, and it was told that out of every 100 youth, 75% are sextortion of boys, and 25% are sextortion of girls, and that's currently. And so with the boys, it becomes financial sextortion. The sextortionist, the offender, the bad actor is asking for monetary. So gift card codes, money, and oftentimes the boys, at the small amount, it may start at $25, $50, has the money to give. And as soon as the first payment is done, it escalates and more threats are given. And through shame, humiliation, and fear of judgment, we have heard tragic stories. I myself have met 5 parents who have had boy children that have died by suicide in the US and in Canada. For girls, 25 out of every 100, it's traditional sextortion. They call it traditional. But for girls, the request is for additional images, sexual images or sexualized videos. And so then the offenders go into the darker web and they trade them like they do baseball cards. It's really horrific. It's horrible. And this is why we need to do something now about this and get the awareness out, get the education out, and get the protections out for our kids and our families, because it's not going away unless we do something about it.
Follow up, Richard.
Minister, I know you were asked earlier about the money towards supporting this, but this is clearly not traditional policing. There's different challenges here to track down these perpetrators. So what resources are the resources dedicated there to ensure that there's support for non-traditional policing? Like, what does that enforcement side look like to ensure that we can try to get some sort of grips on this?
Richard, I think I heard your question. You were a bit blurry at the beginning. So the legislation that we're introducing right now is part of the tools of the entire justice system when it comes to addressing these challenges. So this creates a civil process, right? So a civil process that's outside of the criminal process or the police services that fills a gap. But that doesn't mean that we're not investing and doing work not only on the justice system, so how we look at prosecuting and going after these types of crimes on that side, but also with police investments. And I'm sure Minister Farnham will be able to tell you about the investments that we're doing in policing across the province, and some of that is on specialized forces that would address sexualized violence.
Binda Sargent, CTV News.
Hi, Minister. I just wanted to know, are these two different processes? Like, there's the one process where people can go to get the order, to get the images taken down, and then there's a second civil process?
So what we've heard from a lot of victims, and I saw Grace Laura here before, but she was involved in a lot of the consultations. So what we heard from victims is one of the things that they want is an ability to take down the images and stop distribution. That being a very important part of responding to this, so that's the type of orders that the CRT could issue on that end. But there's also the damage award. So how did that unlawful conduct impact the victim? And that could be heard depending on the size of the claim. It could be heard at the CRT or the Supreme Court or the provincial court, depending on the forum.
Follow up, Binder.
Thank you very much. And can you talk a little bit more about, how someone who is threatening to share these images, how the process would go for someone in that case?
Sure, yeah. So it actually is an expansion from other jurisdictions. So this is the idea that somebody's threatened you to say that they're going to be distributing an intimate image that or they've gotten a hold of. And actually the process is very similar than if it's actual distribution. So you can make a claim at the CRT for similar orders that you could if it was not a threat, if it was actual distribution, and really just telling this person that they're on legal notice that they can't distribute those images.
As a reminder for media on the phone, please take yourself off speakerphone. Next question comes from Sarah Chu, City News.
Hi, my question is for the Attorney General. So you've talked about how you hope to engage with people on the front line, so, in schools and people who work with children, but how will the info about these added supports be spread to the youth themselves, to young adults themselves who this law would apply to, and just tell them that these kinds of supports will be available, like online? How are they going to know about it?
I think I heard the question. Sorry, it's a bit blurry. You're asking how we're going to get the information out?
Yeah, the youth and specifically who would use it. Yeah.
Sure, yeah. So we have a whole plan over the next coming months where we'll be helping to actually talk to frontline workers, and I'll get the support of our PS of Gender Equity, who has good relationships with different organizations across the province, where we can show them the tools. And I was talking to Carol today about how we can get into schools with existing programs that are about basically sexual exploitation and rights, because really what we want every young person to know, and I learned today that before they get a phone in their hand is the best time to do it. We want them to know that they have legal options available for them, and the legal system is there to protect them. And we also want perpetrators to know that there are real consequences for distributing in a non-consensual manner these images. So the idea is to have a whole rollout of education and engagement with people on the front lines.
Sarah, please can you speak slowly and clearly for the room? Thank you. Follow up, Sarah.
Sure, yes, thank you. What did it take for the provincial government to take this step at this time and make legislation for those who've been suffering from this crime? This is something that's happened for decades. So what was the catalyst here? What was the government waiting for?
Well, we are so lucky in this province to have wonderful advocates and leaders like Carol and others who have come forward and are constantly talking to us as a government of what needs to happen. I think the engagement that we had with P.S. Lohr, who was a Parliamentary Secretary at the time and is now Minister, to go around and speak to community and understand how we can take this on. So we really listened and heard about, okay, well, what are the types of things that victims of this sexualized violence want in terms of the justice process? What kind of remedies are they seeking? So what's built into this legislation is really a comprehensive look at that, and how to put that into force. I would say, unfortunately, the young people today face a different reality when it comes to how sexualized violence shows up in their lives. And unfortunately, that's something that we're seeing is on the rise, and we wanted to step in with the legal tools to make that better.
Rob Buffum, CTV Victoria.
Oh, hi, Minister. My first question relates, I just want to understand as best I can about sort of the interplay of the Civil Resolution Tribunal. Is that the mechanism by which people will get an order in relation to internet companies like Facebook, or orders to stop the distribution of their intimate images, or could you go through, the provincial or Supreme Court and just take that traditional civil route that way? Does it have to be through the Civil Resolution Tribunal?
Right. So once the legislation is introduced by regulation, you can go towards the Supreme Court as well. What we learn from legislation that's trying to step into this area across other jurisdictions is that oftentimes victims don't want to go to court. And I think the numbers of victims that come forward both in our criminal process and before the Supreme Court can show that there are significant barriers, or it's hard to go in front of a courtroom and talk about things that carry shame with them as they might in this circumstance. So the reason that we introduced a Civil Resolution Tribunal as a mechanism for resolution and an order is because we wanted a trauma-informed, victim-focused process that was less burdensome than going before the court. But the courts are, of course, open to people, and I think this process, hopefully with the Civil Resolution Tribunal, will actually see more of people coming forward than staying silent and feeling like they don't have legal options.
Follow-up, Rob.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I just wondered as well, this legislation that's been introduced, it doesn't create a new cause of action, does it? I mean, previously under the common law, I'm assuming you could have sued if you were harmed, but this just provides extra tools to help you with that process?
It actually specifically lays out a cause of action when it comes to the non-consensual distribution of intimate images, and it does that through, you'll see in the top part of the Act, is making sure that privacy law is expanded to include the reasonable right of privacy when it comes to the non-disclosure of these intimate images. So it certainly does step into the area of clarifying the law around this when it comes to this.
Back to the room, Les Lane, Times columnist.
Well, thanks. Ms. Todd mentioned earlier an expectation of some sort that the criminal code might be changed. Is the criminal code, is there any process in the works to change it? I haven't tracked it. And is this, if not, is this kind of a fallback while they wait for some strengthening or toughening of the federal criminal code?
Yeah, I think there's always a need to look at the criminal code to see how it can be strengthened. But what I think the unfortunate thing is when it comes to sexualized violence, a lot of victims don't go forward with criminal claims. And that's because of a lot of the process is out of their control in terms of how it goes forward and the decisions that are made by Crown prosecutors. So this process is actually providing a remedy in a different way to people where it's more victim-driven and victim-focused. So I'd say this is an addition to the justice tools that are available out there. And like I said, I think criminal code reform when it comes to how it deals with sexualized violence in general is always a welcome thing.
Follow up, Les.
Are mainstream internet companies trafficking in this stuff, or is it all on some kind of dark web? And if so, what chance do you have of making much headway if it's all kind of underground?
Well, what this legislation does is have this province step up into the field of protecting our citizens that are facing these international forces that land on our shores. So it's giving our justice system, not only the judges for injunctions and orders, but also the Civil Resolution Tribunal, the power to make orders to compel this kind of stuff. We have no reason to believe that if we issued an order about this to a company or somebody to take it down, that they wouldn't, and I would be hopeful that they would comply with these orders since it's victims' lives are at stake.
Fran Yainer, Northern Beat.
Thank you. Just wondering if this civil process is based on another jurisdiction or something that's working somewhere else.
I think it was in response to what we were seeing with when other legislators had stepped in to try to enforcing this, that we weren't seeing a lot of claims in areas like the Supreme Court, and we're lucky here to have a Civil Resolution Tribunal that's been taking on jurisdiction when it comes to access to justice and has a lot of experience in terms of online applications and making things easier in a digital platform. So to us, it seemed like a really natural place for us to increase access to justice for this type of sexualized violence. I'm really hopeful that it means that we'll see more claims in other jurisdictions that relied on the Supreme Court, and that more people will feel empowered to come forward and understand that that this is a process that they can do on their own.
Follow up, Fran.
Yes. So you're not aware of anything similar to this operating anywhere else?
I'm not aware, but we can follow up if I come to hear anything or understand. My understanding is in Canada, at least, it's the Supreme Courts where all the legislation would hear these types of orders, are not exactly the same, but types of actions. It may be somewhere in the world that they have a similar model, and if there is, we can get you that information. Yeah. Oh, Carol, come on in. There you go.
So on top of protection acts in different provinces, Canada also has the Canadian Centre for Child Protection, and they have an initiative called Project Arachnid, where an individual can send their image to C3P, and they'll scan it for the pixels or the hashes on the image, and then they will scour the internet and get it taken down also. In addition to that, and with Canadian Centre for Child Protection, anybody from any country can go and push the report button and put a report in. So it's not Canada-centered. They'll take reports from other countries, and then CyberTips will contact that other jurisdiction. In addition to that, the National Centre for Exploited and Missing Children, based out of Virginia in the United States, has just launched a campaign called Take It Down, and where you also hit the report button, send your image or video, and they will assist in taking an image or video down. They have gotten, if you go to their website, they have got Meta involved, they have got OnlyFans involved, Yubo, and there's another one that I don't recall. There's also a link that if you are an adult over 18 plus, so you're an adult, there's another link that you can use a report button to get images taken down. So in addition to BC, there's a lot of other sort of resources, but those resources are needed because one province can't do it by themselves.
Returning to the phone, our last question comes from Mary Brooke, Island Social Trends.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I'm just wondering what you're doing on the education preventative side of this so that images like this don't happen in the first place. Is there something happening through the school system, or will there be a public education program?
Yeah, so we plan on the rolling out of this to really get into the front line of education systems and also frontline workers so they can understand the tools that would be available to them online to access this type of order. I think a big part of introducing legislation like this in the province is also has a deterrence factor. Perpetrators or would-be perpetrators can know that they will face consequences when it comes to distributing something that they don't have consent to do. So of course with that deterrent aspect, it requires us to push out there with the education and make sure that everybody knows, and that's part of the work that we're doing all here today, and we'll continue to work to do. And Carol's been doing excellent work and has already offered to help us with figuring out exactly where we need to target that. You want to come in?
Mm-hmm. As an educator myself in the Coquitlam School District, my role is I am a coordinator of digital literacy. And so in my district, what I do is I plan programming and resources for my teachers in my school district based on how to be more digital literate, how to be a digital citizen. We use the ERASE program, the initiative, with lots of resources. And sextortion exploitation is part of our conversation now with teachers, with kids. So that's the awareness prevention part, right? We have that reactionary part once an image is distributed. But we want to get to the prevention piece first so that it doesn't happen, so it doesn't go there, so no one is harmed, so no one is traumatized. And so we want to teach our kids what to do and what to do in case of being asked for images, talking to strangers online, people they don't know. Like 80% of kids out there talk to people they don't know. And was this a result of COVID? Maybe. But we have to work hard in order to educate and make our adults aware, make our parents aware so they talk to their kids, make our teachers more knowledgeable so that they can talk to their classes of kids. And so our province is educating through the ERASE initiative programming, and every teacher in BC has a digital literacy framework to follow in education with goals about privacy, about exploitation, who to talk to, how to become a digital citizenship, respect, all those kinds of things. In my research and findings, our province has the best framework going for teachers to follow. So that's part of the education piece that's happening.
Thanks, Carol. Follow up, Mary.
Tips for parents, because a lot of the programming that happens in schools doesn't always make its way home through teenagers. So for any parents that would be listening or hearing this message today, how is it best for them to approach the teens in their lives?
Well, through the Erase initiative, through the Ministry of Education, they've been hosting a series of student events, so classroom teachers can register and have their classes go online and watch these presentations. There's also parent events, Parent Plus students, and the next one is actually March 8th in the evening. You can go on the Erase website and you can find it there, and if you can't, if they can't, they can find it. Find me. If you find me, I have the link, right? I just sat through one of the presentations last week, and I would say it's exceptional. So you talk about consent and healthy relationships and boundaries. Those are things that our kids need to learn. And as parents, I would recommend that you find a resource, a link, a webinar, a session, and you go and take it. And so I'm going to just plug, there's another one on March 27th, hosted by UBC Education. And it's about online safety, connecting with our kids, and you can go to UBC Education and you can find the link there. Take as many courses, or take as many training sessions and learn as much as you can, because you will find different information at each of them. And so for parent education, the Erase website also has a button for parents to find tools and resources. There are Common Sense Media, TELUS-Wise, Media Smarts. Those are just some of the highlighted websites and organizations that have really good information and tools for parents.
Thank you, everyone, and that concludes today's event.
Okay, thank you, everybody.